Welcome to Mr. Disturbing. Tonight, we're plunging into the dark heart of the Appalachians with some truly unsettling true horror stories. That'll keep you up all night. If you're brave enough, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into fear. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 42 years old now. I live in western North Carolina, not far from Bryson City. Most of my life has been ordinary. I own a hardware store. I fish on the weekends. I don't talk much about my childhood. There's one thing I never told anyone, not even my wife. Something that happened when I was 9 years old. Something I didn't understand until much later. Something that changed the way I looked at the woods forever. My dad went missing in October of 1989. He was a hunter, a good one. We lived on the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains. He and my Uncle Dave would go out together every fall, for years. Same ridge, same path, same ritual. Until that year. That was the first time they took me with them. I was finally old enough, they said. I remember the chill in the air, the damp soil, the smell of pine and cold earth. We hiked deep into the ridges past a logging road that hadn't been used in decades. We camped for 2 nights. Nothing unusual. We tracked a buck but never got it. On the 3rd morning, my dad said he was going to scout a different part of the ridge alone. Told my uncle to take me back down toward the stream. Said we'd meet back at the fire pit before sundown. He never came back. We searched for 3 days. Local search and rescue came in. Dogs, helicopters. Nothing. No scent, no boot prints, no blood, not a single trace. It was like the trees had swallowed him. I remember my uncle pacing by the fire, calling out again and again, his voice hollow in the fog. I remember him holding my shoulders too tight, whispering, "He's not here," over and over. After the 4th night, the authorities said it was a wild animal. Maybe he slipped near the edge. Maybe a bear took the body downhill. But even as a kid, I knew they were lying. Or maybe they were afraid. I never went back after that. Not for years. I grew up, tried to forget. But something about it never left. It stayed quiet for a long time. Until last fall, when my uncle called me. Said he couldn't stop dreaming about the ridge. Said he'd seen something. Something in the dark. I asked him what he meant. He didn't explain. Just said, "I need you to come with me." And I did. Because part of me always wanted to know. Part of me needed to see that place again. To prove something to myself. So we packed our gear. Just like they used to. And we went back. 33 years later. To the same trail, the same clearing, the same cold wind whispering through the same dead trees. And the moment my boots hit the soil, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my chest. Like the land was waiting, like it remembered me. The path hadn't changed. But the woods around it had. The trees were too close now, the undergrowth too quiet. There were no birds, no squirrels. Just the soft sound of needles falling from branches that didn't move. It took us most of the day to reach the old fire pit. It looked exactly the same. Charred logs still in place, rusted canteen half buried by leaves. We set up camp, ate in silence. My uncle barely spoke, just stared into the tree line, like he was listening. After dark, the fog rolled in, thick. Heavy, the kind that seems to come from the ground up. I asked if he remembered where my dad had gone that morning. He nodded, just pointed toward the east ridge, said, "It's different now." And he was right. The path wasn't overgrown, it was gone. Like the trees had grown over it in a perfect line. No broken branches, no animal trails, just wall-to-wall pine that didn't shift in the wind. I asked if he still wanted to go. He said yes. And before sunrise, we did. We took only what we needed: flashlights, compass, water. My uncle brought his old rifle, said it didn't matter if it worked, he just needed to carry it. I didn't ask why. I just followed. We pushed through the trees for hours. The further we went, the harder it was to keep our bearings. The trees were all the same size, same spacing, like they'd been planted by hand, and the fog followed us, no matter how high we climbed. By noon, the light barely made it through. Our compasses spun. My phone died. The air smelled strange, sweet at first, then sour, and then nothing at all, just cold, sharp, empty. We stopped when we saw the bones. Not human, deer, maybe, but wrong, twisted in on themselves, ribs too long, skull cracked down the middle, like something had crushed it from above. My uncle didn't say a word, just kept walking. We found the clearing just before sunset, perfect circle, no trees, no brush, just bare soil and moss-covered stone. At the center, a depression in the ground, like a nest or a grave. I stepped closer. That's when I saw the boot, half buried, weathered, split at the toe, the same kind my dad wore. I called out. My uncle didn't move, just whispered. He never left. Then he stepped into the clearing and knelt by the nest, pulled something from his coat, a pendant, silver, worn. It was my father's. I'd seen it in old photos. He placed it on the soil and stood, said nothing, just looked at me and said, "You need to stay behind me now." I stood just outside the edge of the clearing, watching my uncle as he stared into that sunken patch of earth, his hands at his sides, his eyes locked on something I couldn't see, and I felt it again. That stillness, the unnatural kind, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from absence, as if the whole forest was holding its breath around us, and the wind didn't touch my face anymore, and the trees behind me stopped creaking, and the air became thick like water, and my feet felt heavy against the soil, like the ground had softened beneath them without actually giving way. And then my uncle said it, soft and flat and steady. It never let him go. And I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer right away. He just walked around the circle slowly, like he was measuring something or checking for an invisible border, and then he stopped across from me and knelt again, brushing aside the moss, revealing more bones, smaller this time, finger length, scattered and darkened. And as I looked closer, I saw they weren't all from animals, because one of them had a ring still wrapped around it. Silver, cracked, half swallowed by the soil, and I didn't need to ask whose it was. I remembered that ring from the day my mother threw it into the fireplace and cried for hours without explaining why, and that's when the smell hit me. Faint at first, like wet leaves, then stronger, sour and metallic and too warm for the cold air around us. And I looked back toward the edge of the clearing where the trees began again, and I saw that they had shifted, just slightly, barely enough to notice. But now they were closer than before, as if the whole line of trunks had leaned inward while we weren't watching. And my uncle stood again, his voice low and rough, and said, "They move when you don't look." And I turned to ask him what the hell he meant, but his eyes were wide and wet and locked on the trees, and he was shaking now, his whole body tight like a wire pulled too far. And I heard something then, something soft, something wet, a slithering scrape, like bark dragging across stone. And I saw the nearest tree shift again, this time clearly, roots lifting ever so slightly from the ground, not rising, not reaching, but repositioning. And it stopped the moment I looked at it full on, and behind it another did the same, and I stepped backward without meaning to. Breath short, heart pounding, and my uncle grabbed my arm hard and said, "We're not going back the way we came." And he pointed to the far side of the clearing where the soil dipped again into a shallow path between two ridges, narrow and dark and filled with more of that creeping fog, and I told him we should head back. We should mark the site and leave and call someone. But he just shook his head and said, "We're too far in. It won't let us out unless it's done." And before I could argue, he stepped into the hollow path. And I followed because I didn't want to be left alone there, not even for a second. And the trees behind us closed in, not with noise, not fast, but subtly, shadows pressing tighter around the trail like they'd been waiting for us to cross that line. And the further we walked, the more wrong things became. The stones on the ground were too smooth. Not worn smooth, but worked, like they'd been shaped by hand into rounded, palm-sized chunks and left scattered like breadcrumbs. And the fog had a taste to it now, sweet like rot. And every so often I saw movement just at the edges of my sight. Not animals, not wind, but forms, tall and narrow, swaying in place. And once I thought I heard breathing from the left, and when I turned my light that way, I saw a shape step back behind a tree, too thin, too tall, arms too long, fingers brushing the dirt, and then it was gone. And I didn't tell my uncle because I knew he'd seen it too, and he didn't want to say it out loud. And after what felt like hours, we came to a break in the ridge, a rock face covered in vines and lichen, with a narrow crack just wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. And my uncle looked at it like it was a door, and he said, "This is where it began." And I asked, "Where what began?" And he just stared at the opening and said, "He went in, and something else came out." And before I could stop him, he was sliding sideways into the dark, his shoulders scraping the stone. And I had no choice but to follow. And the passage went deeper than I expected, sloping down in tight angles. Air growing stale and still, and after 20 feet it opened into a chamber, a natural cavern, or what once might have been, but the walls were covered in carvings, not modern, not letters, just crude shapes gouged deep into the stone, rows of vertical lines with circles above them, and between them long jagged spirals etched with what looked like claws, and the floor was littered with bones again, this time arranged in patterns, not random, not scattered, but laid out in rings, each one smaller than the last, leading to a flat stone at the center, blackened by fire or worse, and sitting on that stone was a pile of fabric, old, mold-darkened, torn, and folded around something hard, something round, and I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know, but I stepped closer anyway, and I reached out and peeled it back, and underneath was a skull, human, small, clean, missing the jaw, and beside it was a tooth wrapped in thread, tied to a loop of deer hide, and I felt the world go silent then. Not just the cave, but everything, like time itself had paused to watch, and I turned to speak. But my uncle wasn't standing anymore. He was kneeling by the wall, his hands pressed to the carvings, his lips moving but no sound coming out. And as I stepped toward him, I saw the walls shift again, the stone itself rippling like water, and a shape began to emerge, not from the surface, but from within, something pressing forward, not fast, not sudden, just rising. And my uncle turned to me then, tears running down his face, and said, "It's still him, but it's not." And behind him, the figure pulled itself free. The thing that rose behind my uncle was not something that belonged in the world as I knew it. It was shaped like a man, but only loosely, like someone had tried to rebuild a body from memory and forgotten how joints were supposed to bend. It unfolded from the rock in silence, the same silence that had swallowed every sound in the clearing above. And the moment it stood upright, I saw its face, or the absence of it, because where eyes should have been, there were only dark, sunken hollows, and where a mouth belonged, there was a wide, jagged seam, stretched from one cheek to the other, sewn shut with something that looked like fishing wire and bone, and its skin was pale and wrinkled like dried bark, drawn too tight over a frame that looked too long for any human bones. And my uncle didn't move, didn't scream, didn't try to run. He just kept whispering to the wall like it was a prayer or a bargain, and I stood frozen in the half-light, my flashlight dimming even though the batteries had been fresh, and the smell returned. Strong now, coppery and sour, the unmistakable scent of old blood and deeper earth. And then it stepped forward, the creature slow and deliberate, its head tilted as if listening, and I saw something in its hands, a strip of old cloth, blood-stained and knotted, and I recognized it before I could stop myself. It was from my father's coat, the one he'd worn the day he disappeared. The one I remembered pulling from the dryer every October until the year it vanished, and something inside me cracked then, not from fear, but from grief, raw and sharp and unfinished, and I said his name out loud just once, and the thing turned toward me. And in that moment, I didn't see a monster. I saw my father's eyes, deep in those sockets, flickering for a second, just enough to know he had once been part of this thing, had once walked into this place and never left, and the seam across its face twitched, like something inside it was straining to speak. And I took a step back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would tear through my ribs. And my uncle finally stood, turned toward me, and said, "This is what they made him." And before I could ask who they were, I saw the walls move again. Not with creatures this time, but with symbols, lighting up along the carvings like glowing scars, spiraling patterns and jagged teeth and long-limbed shapes crouched around fire. And I understood then that this place was older than us, older than the mountains, older than the names we gave it, and that the thing that wore my father's skin had not escaped something. It had become something, chosen or consumed or both. And whatever ancient ritual had been started that morning in 1989 had not ended, had not closed. It had only paused, and now I was standing inside it, part of it, the final piece, and the creature raised one hand not in threat, but in invitation. Long fingers curling like a branch, and I took another step back, but my uncle moved forward, placed a hand on its arm, and said quietly, "He never wanted to leave you." And the thing tilted its head again, and for a moment it stopped shaking, stopped twitching, and the seam across its face loosened, thread fraying, lips parting ever so slightly. And I heard something beneath the stone, a sound like weeping, distant, wet, endless. And the cave around us began to pulse again, like lungs drawing a final breath, and I screamed, not words, just sound, just the raw, panicked echo of everything I had held back for 33 years, and that was when the light exploded, a burst of colorless flame from the center stone, blinding and silent. And when I opened my eyes again, I was outside, lying face down in the dirt beside the original fire pit, my clothes soaked with dew, my ears ringing, and the forest was still again, birds chirping, breeze rustling the trees like nothing had ever happened, like I had dreamed it all. But my hands were cut, dirt-streaked, and in my fist was the silver pendant, my father's, the one my uncle had placed on the grave. And I sat up slowly, scanning the clearing. But I was alone. The ridge was quiet. The fog was gone. And there were no tracks, no broken branches. No sign of my uncle, only the fire pit, cold and long dead. And the sound of wind brushing through the pines. And when I stood, I saw something carved into the trunk of the nearest tree. Fresh, deep, a spiral with a single line drawn through its center, and beneath it, the word "stay" scratched into the bark in block letters. And I don't remember walking back to the truck. I don't remember the trail or the sun or the hours that passed, only the steady thud of my heart and the feeling that the woods were watching, that every tree I passed was counting, remembering, judging. And when I finally reached the road, my truck was where we'd left it, but my uncle's pack was missing, and the passenger seat was soaked with something too dark to be water. And I drove without stopping, without checking the rear view. without looking at the tree line that crept closer to the road with every mile. And I never went back after that. I told no one. I buried the pendant deep in a locked box under my floorboards, and some nights I dream of him, my father, standing at the edge of the clearing, face split down the middle, mouth stitched shut, but eyes full of sorrow, not rage, not hunger, just the sadness of someone who tried to resist and couldn't. And I wake up to the sound of branches tapping on my window, even when there's no wind. And I swear sometimes I hear my name carried on the breeze, not from far away, but from just outside the door. And I know that if I ever open it at the wrong time, I won't be alone anymore. And the thing that watches from the ridge will be standing there, wearing a face I used to know.